Hello to everyone and the internet. It is currently Thursday, December 27th. I am Nathan of Washington, and you are watching The Young Globalist, and this is the news. Alright, so Trump now says that 9/11 was a controlled demolition. Yeah, today's news is going to be a little Trumpy. It's going to be very Trumpy, people. But let me read you this article, and then I'll give you my opinion on it. It says, Donald Trump hints 9/11 was a controlled demolition. The collapse of the World Trade Towers on 9/11 was caused by a controlled demolition, Donald Trump claims. Well, he's not the only one. Gotta admit, certain facts are kind of iffy. Speaking to Channel 9's Roland Smith and Andy Marcus, Trump appears to side with academics and thousands of architects and engineers, who all believe that there is no possible way the planes could have brought down the two towers. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams, as the quote goes. CollectiveEvolution.com reports, here's what Trump had to say taken from this interview. It wasn't an architectural defect. The World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget that building took a bomb in the basement in 1993. Now the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation. And it withstood that. I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place, because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour. Because he did the building, and I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and a half of the columns were blown out. So this was an unbelievably powerful building. After talking about the structure of the building and the way it was built with the steel on the outside, first building ever to do so for structural purposes, and how it's not possible for a plane to destroy that, he went on to say, how could a plane, even a 767 or a 747 or wherever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously. Because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. I just think that there was a plane with more than just fuel. Obviously, they were very big planes. They were going very rapidly. You're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on the building. These buildings were rock solid. Yeah, Trump can tell you a thing or two about walls, if you catch my meaning. Trump also stated the fact that the U.S. government had knowledge before the attack, before it even happened, and they still did not stop it. He also mentioned that he saw a big hole in some of the steel beams, hinting to explosions. Trump has been quite outspoken regarding corporate control over the government, as well as all of the deceit that goes on as to how our government has been hijacked by rogue groups within the government. It's easy to see why he was and is completely vilified. It had nothing to do with racism or sexism. And if you think this, you're simply regurgitating what you got from television program and have no understanding how politics work. Other commentators on the deep web. Below is a great quote from Robert W. Welch Jr., given way back in 1958 addressing the deep state. So brush the insider's dust out of your eyes, my friends, and the communist soap suds out of your brain, and ask yourselves in all honesty, what on earth is wrong with the United States simply minding its own business, or with having its foreign policy function primarily for the safety and benefit of the American people, which is exactly what we had done for the first 140 years of our existence as a nation, to the incredible advantage of ourselves and everybody else. Everybody that is except a numerically small clique of power-lusting conspirators who have somehow inflicted themselves on a gullible world. The American Empire has had a history of infiltrating and destroying other countries through unethical means, terrorism, and then stepping in to be a savior, imposing their will on others. This has been done through the most savage means, with 9/11 being one small example compared to what they've done overseas. In other words, they're calling 9/11 a false flag attempt. The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy legs over our cities, states, and nation. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties and control the majority of newspapers and magazines in this country. John F. Hyland was mayor of New York City from 1918 to 1925. But it is not representative of America, but rather the corruption within politics and the deep state that in no way represents the will of the American people. Steve R. Pieczenik, P-I-E-C-Z-E-N-I-K, Pieczenik, is one of many people from within these ranks who is currently speaking about this. He's a former United States Department of State official and has been involved in the intelligence community for years. He's been through and worked with multiple administrations. He's been providing updates on what is happening in the deep state that exists within the American government, and how there's currently a battle between the Trump administration and the deep state. You can find those interviews online everywhere. He conducted most of them with Alex Jones. He's also been outspoken and addressed that Trump has already commented on 9/11 and referenced the interview below. Trump survived the attacks. This is why Trump has been vilified. I'll leave you with this great quote from author Richard Dolan, taken from one of his 2016 articles. For sure, the power elite closed ranks and did everything possible to ensure a victory for Clinton. This included not only the Democratic Party, which previously played dirty pool against Bernie Sanders, but the entire mainstream media machine, the financial community, the EU, and even the Republican Party itself. If nothing else, I concluded that the media alone had done a sufficient job of demonizing Trump. Multiple negative headlines daily for more than a year to make him unelectable to the American people. For more than a year, we have been told that Trump is a racist, sexist, xenophobe, liar, cheat, and narcissist. The attack bears all the marks of a coordinated effort among the major news outlets, CNN, NYT, WAPO, HuffPo, USA Today, and the rest. It reminded me very much of the concerted media attack against Brazil's Dilma Rousseff, which culminated earlier in 2016 in her impeachment and removal from power. In the case of Rousseff, we see what has been alternatively described as a soft coup, or a Wall Street coup, rather along the lines of the color revolutions of a few years earlier, which are now largely understood as CIA NGO orchestrated. In both cases, pretexts were created and hammered home by an insistent media that whipped up public opinion in Brazil. It worked, it seemed like it would work in the US. It is important to understand why Trump was demonized, to be sure. His character makes it easy. There is no shortage of narcissistic, sexist, or otherwise offensive statements in his repertoire from which to draw. But I have never and will never believe this is why he was demonized ultimately. Trump is a disruptor, and his disruption falls squarely against the two key pillars of the American ruling elite's ideology: neoliberalism and neoconservatism. There are many reasons to believe that Trump's survival is a sign that the deep state is losing its power. In the battle that there's that name again, Steve Pieczenik, talks about is going in favor of the Trump administration and their allies. If so, 2018 might be the last year we have to pass through 9/11 without the full and incontestable knowledge about what actually happens. So, the article says that Trump is now a believer in the 9/11 being a controlled demolition. And of course, the term deep state turns up again. I have an alternative to the theory of the deep state, and yes, it is a theory with very little real evidence. I have an alternative for you. All those news networks they have mentioned, MSNBC, CNN, guess what they all have in common? They're left-leaning. And they push those ideas about Trump because he was from the opposing party. There is little evidence of the deep state. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Democrats and neoliberals are in control of, or at least have a lot of influence over the media, with the exception of Fox Network. In short, people only believe that there's a deep state because they found the deep state functioning inside of Turkey. Then they saw that and they're like, oh. People over here who don't understand how politics works started thinking, oh, there must be a deep state here too. The Illuminati conspiracies and so forth. Do I believe that the Twin Towers were a controlled demolition? Based on the scientific facts? Yes. So you're wondering, well, if you don't believe in the deep state, then who was behind it? I'll tell you who was behind it. CIA. The CIA and George W. Bush. A deliberate false flag to justify a war in Iraq. As directed by the Rothschild banks, the Federal Reserve, who we owe a lot of money to, and that oil makes us a lot of money. It's part of a system where we're trying to pay them back. But that's just it, though. They don't want us to pay them back. They're going to keep making us spend more money so that we'll continue to owe them. That's part of the Rothschild banking empire. And that one you can prove. Because you know what the Federal Reserve is? It's a bank that it chose the name federal so people would believe that it belonged to the people, it belonged to the government. It's not federal at all. You go to the Federal Reserve, no one can even open the door. No one knows what's in there. The door is perfectly sealed. What if we open that door and we find nothing? Just empty. A hollow shell. An excuse for us to spend money on the Rothschild's banking empire. There's your deep state. Because that has real evidence. Because if you look at the Chronicle of World War II, you can see all of the Rothschild's activities during World War II listed clearly in the Chronicle, and you can prove that there's banks all over the world owned by the Rothschilds. Not only that, but the current patriarch of the clan, what's his name? Nathan, I think it was? No, obviously not me, but when someone asked him, confronted him about the fact that his banking empire was taking over the world, he doesn't even deny it. He turns around and says, what are you going to do about it? He literally said it in an interview. I saw it. At an actual financial conference. If that's not an admission, I don't know what is. But 9/11, our own government did that. As part of a system to try and pay off the Rothschild banks. Well, all the money that we owe them. From all the spending. From all the loans from their banks. But they don't want us to pay them back. So some conspiracies I think are true because I go where the evidence goes. I don't care about theories or feelings. But that's just my opinion. Trump's barking up the wrong tree. Anyway. Trump also stated in the news that he will stop the UN from creating a one-world government. And some of the foundations of the UN, some of their founding ideas, are socialist in nature, and as Joseph Stalin himself once said, socialism exists to set up communism. So socialism, folks, not a good thing. The UN does seem to have an agenda for 2030. There was a stated agenda they had for 2030 that only world leaders know about that Trump mentioned. And they had recently enacted some pretty obvious globalist legislation, i.e. their migration pact for one, which straight up violates national sovereignty. The article I read only has 2 cited sources, which is not much, but it does have an actual Trump speech. There's little concrete evidence that honestly proves that they even want to create a one-world government. There's not much there. But what is there does seem to hint in that direction. So, like I said, I go where the evidence goes. If there's not enough to concretely prove it, I'll leave it open as a possibility, and I will consider that possibility, and I will thoroughly consider it. But until I get absolute concrete evidence, I am not even going to give it a second thought. But here I will play you the Trump speech in question.
Madam President.
Well, part of it.
Mr. Secretary General.
It's a long thing. It's 34 minutes.
World leaders, ambassadors, and distinguished delegates. 1 year ago, I stood before you for the first time in this grand hall. I addressed the threats facing our world, and I presented a vision to achieve a brighter future for all of humanity. Today I stand before the United Nations General Assembly to share the extraordinary progress we've made. In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
I'll speed it ahead a little bit for you here.
A rich history and a people bound together by ties of memory, tradition, and the values that make our homelands like nowhere else on earth. That is why America will always choose independence and cooperation over global governance, control, and domination.
Platitudes about America.
Last month, we began reimposing hard-hitting nuclear sanctions that have been lifted under the Iran deal. Additional sanctions will resume November 5th, and more will follow. And we are working with countries that import Iranian crude oil to cut their purchases substantially. We cannot allow the world's leading sponsor of terrorism to possess the planet's most dangerous weapons. We cannot allow a regime that chants death to America and that threatens Israel with annihilation to possess the means to deliver a nuclear warhead to any city on earth. Just can't do it. We ask all nations to isolate Iran's regime as long as its aggression continues, and we ask all nations to support Iran's people as they struggle to reclaim.
Not hearing much about a one world government here.
Had become a grave embarrassment to this institution, shielding egregious human rights abuses while bashing America and its many friends. Our ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, laid out a clear agenda for reform, but despite reported and repeated warnings, no action at all was taken. So the United States took the only responsible course. We withdrew from the Human Rights Council, and we will not return until real reform is enacted. For similar reasons, the United States will provide no support in recognition to the International Criminal Court.
When is he going to say something about a one world government?
Threats to sovereignty from uncontrolled migration, tolerance for human struggle and human smuggling and trafficking is not humane. It's a horrible thing that's going on at levels that nobody has ever seen before. It's very, very cruel. Illegal immigration funds, criminal networks, ruthless gangs, and the flow of deadly drugs. Illegal immigration exploits vulnerable populations, hurts hard-working citizens, and has produced a vicious cycle of crime, violence, and poverty. Only by upholding national borders, destroying criminal gangs, can we break this cycle and establish a real foundation for prosperity. We recognize the right of every nation in this room
Where's he going to talk about one world government? Oh, this is bullshit. Anyway, in the article, he was saying that in the 1960s, an informed but naive undergraduate, I was walking across the campus of the University of Pennsylvania with the chairman of the chemistry department, Professor Charles C. Price. He told me that he was president of the United World Federalists and asked if I knew what that organization was. When I said that I did not, he replied that they believed in a one-world government that would grow out of the United Nations. I was nonplussed, as I had never heard anyone suggest that idea before. To me, the United Nations was a benevolent organization dedicated to pressuring the world community in the direction of peace and to operating charitable programs to help struggling and impoverished peoples of the world. I imagine the UN as a kind of united way, on a worldwide scale. My conclusion that there are those individuals in the United Nations that want a one-world government, and it would seem that those individuals are unfortunately the ones who've been running the show as of late. Anyway, moving on. Stage 4 cancer. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has 6 months to live. And the cancer's been in her for a while now. This is actually related to an earlier cancer that migrated to a different part of her body several times. Vision of perfect health, yeah right. Hillary Clinton is in better health than Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But all these politicians, they just want to be running the show forever. So they lie about their health and try to stay alive as long as they can just so they can keep running the show. Let's put an end to career politicians. I say let's put massive term limits on their on how long they can be in office. And if they don't consent, we riot. We the people are their power. We're the ones who vote them into office in the first place. They don't put term limits, then we'll kick them out. We'll riot. I know I will. I'll get some buddies together and we'll protest. We'll have our own yellow vest movement. We'll start protesting career politicians. Britain now withdraws nuclear archives from public view without explanation. And a government that is growing by the day more and more despotic, the British government, there's reason to be concerned that they just pull nuclear research archives from public view with no explanation. That to me seems very suspicious. Like maybe they're going to restart their nuke program. A program that they canceled and backed off from some time ago. I gotta wonder about Britain these days. It's not looking good. Trump is now keeping troops in Iraq to help the Iraq government fight what's left of ISIS. So yes, ISIS is all but defeated. He's pulling our troops from Syria, but not from Iraq. He's in Iraq to help what now, for all intents and purposes, is functionally an ally. And so they'll keep fighting what's left of ISIS, but the U.S. presence will be minimal. It's the right thing to do. No more military-industrial complex, no more overseas fighting. National security should be about the nation, not about other nations. And then finally, no end in sight of partial government shutdown. They have no idea how long the government's going to stay partially shut down. Excuse me. Gesundheit. But there really is no end in sight, because they just won't capitulate. They will not give him his wall funding. He's getting his wall funding through crowdfunding and the occasional little thing they give him when he refuses to give up. He forces them to cooperate by being stubborn. And even then, they don't totally give in. So bottom line is, Trump is basically fighting a never-ending war with the Democrats, who just refuse to capitulate. They're the reason why America's so divided. Them and people who are socialists and Marxists, who believe in socialism and communism, and want America to go all the way, in spite of the evidence suggesting that going all the way will be a disaster. You want a religion that spreads through violence and by the sword? Communism. It is a religion, because it demands in blind faith that it'll just somehow work. Blind faith in communism. It's foolishness. I say keep the government shut down until the Democratic Party collapses, because it, by and large, is the source of America's divide. Vote capitalist. Let the socialism and the Marxism die. Till its influence remains but a whisper in the sands of time. Anyway, that's it for the Young Globalist today, folks. I'm out.